The last light of the day always leaves quietly. One minute, your backyard is full of familiar sounds, the rustle of oak leaves, the distant hum of traffic, the soft creak of a porch swing moving in the evening breeze. Then, almost without noticing when it happened, everything begins to settle. Shadows stretch across the grass. The air feels cooler. The branches stop shimmering and simply become silhouettes against a fading sky. Somewhere beyond the fence, a blue jay gives a single sharp call. Then nothing. Most people hear that silence and assume the day is over for the birds. But sometimes silence is not the end of a conversation. Sometimes it is the moment a different one begins. You may have felt it yourself without ever knowing why. That brief hesitation before reaching for the doorknob. The strange impulse to glance toward the tallest tree in the yard. The quiet feeling that something just shifted, even though nothing appears different at all. If you're new here, take a moment to subscribe before you leave. Because what you're about to discover may forever change the way you listen to the birds outside your window. Especially after the sun disappears beyond the trees, there is a world unfolding above your backyard every single night that most of us never notice. Not because it is hidden from view, but because we have forgotten what quiet observation feels like. And this is where everything begins to change. The blue jay has not gone to sleep. It has simply stopped speaking in a language meant for human ears. What happens next is so subtle that even people who spend years watching birds often miss the moment completely. Yet once you see it, you may never look at an ordinary evening in quite the same way again. You know the feeling, even if you have never found the words for it. You step outside just after sunset to bring in a cushion, check the mailbox, or simply stand on the porch for a minute before the day is completely gone. Nothing remarkable is supposed to happen. Yet every so often, you stop without knowing why. The evening feels exactly as it did a moment ago, and somehow completely different. The breeze still moves through the branches. The scent of fresh-cut grass or damp earth still lingers in the air. A porch light glows softly across the street. But your attention drifts upward, almost as if something quietly invited it there. Perhaps you catch the faint outline of a blue jay shifting deeper into the canopy. Perhaps you do not see anything at all. Even so, you remain still for another few seconds. Most people brush moments like these aside. They tell themselves they were distracted, tired, or simply lost in thought. Yet those small pauses seem to return throughout life in places that should feel ordinary. A familiar path suddenly feels unfamiliar. A quiet backyard somehow feels occupied without seeming crowded. You cannot explain it, but neither can you ignore it. There is something deeply human about noticing a change before understanding its cause. Long before we had clocks, screens, or electric lights, people survived by sensing subtle shifts in the world around them. Maybe that quiet awareness has never truly disappeared. Maybe it has only grown quieter beneath the noise of everyday life. And that is what makes the next part so intriguing, because while you are standing there wondering why the evening suddenly feels different, something else has already noticed the change as well. And it has begun to respond in ways that are almost impossible to recognize unless you know exactly what to look for. If you stayed outside just a little longer, you might begin to notice something that has always been there. Not a dramatic movement, not a loud call echoing through the trees. Quite the opposite. A blue jay settles onto a high branch that it rarely uses during the brightest hours of the day. It does not seem restless. It does not seem ready to sleep either. Instead, it waits. Every few moments, its head turns with remarkable precision, first toward the edge of the woods, then across the neighboring yards, then back toward the open sky. A few seconds later, a distant robin shifts to a lower perch. Somewhere beyond your view, a chickadee answers with a call so soft it almost disappears into the evening air. None of these moments appear connected. Most people would never think they are. They seem like ordinary behaviors unfolding independently, each bird following its own quiet routine before night settles in. Yet if you watch the same backyard often enough, a different picture slowly begins to emerge. The movements are rarely random. The pauses seem to ripple from one tree to another. One bird changes position, then another does the same. A branch that was empty moments ago quietly becomes occupied, while another is left behind without any obvious reason. It is almost as though invisible threads stretch between creatures separated by dozens of yards, each subtle movement gently influencing the next. Nothing announces that a message has been sent. There is no single moment you could point to and say, "There it is." That is precisely what makes it so easy to overlook. But once your eyes begin following these tiny patterns instead of searching for dramatic events, the backyard no longer feels like a collection of individual birds. It begins to feel like one quiet conversation unfolding across the fading light, spoken in movements so small that only patience seems capable of hearing them. For a long time, people believed these quiet evening movements were nothing more than instinct, birds settling down, finding a safe place for the night. That explanation is not wrong. It is simply incomplete. Over the past several decades, researchers studying songbirds have discovered something that changed the way they understand these moments. Many backyard species do not pay attention only to members of their own kind. They constantly monitor the calls, movements, and reactions of entirely different species, quietly borrowing information from one another. Scientists call this a shared information network, but standing in a quiet backyard, it feels much less like a scientific term and much more like watching neighbors exchange glances that say everything without a single word. A blue jay does not need to speak endlessly for the others to notice. A slight shift to a higher branch can matter. A pause that lasts 2 seconds longer than usual can matter. Even the direction a bird faces may quietly influence how another responds a few yards away. Researchers have documented that birds often make decisions based on signals they overhear rather than dangers they see themselves. That simple discovery changes something profound. It suggests that life in your backyard is not unfolding as dozens of separate stories. It is unfolding as one shared awareness, spread across feathers, branches, and fading light. And perhaps that explains why the atmosphere sometimes changes before anything obvious appears. Your senses are taking in hundreds of tiny details without asking your permission. The silence feels different because the patterns have changed. The world has already whispered that something is happening, long before your conscious mind can translate what it has quietly received. Suddenly, that brief hesitation on the porch no longer feels like imagination. It feels like the first faint echo of a conversation that has been unfolding around you all along. After enough evenings, something else begins to change. And this time it is not only the birds. It is you. Without planning to, you find yourself stepping onto the porch at nearly the same time each night. The coffee mug stays warm in your hands a little longer. You leave the porch light off, almost instinctively, letting your eyes adjust to the fading blue of the sky instead. The backyard no longer feels like a place you simply look at. It begins to feel like a place you quietly enter. The blue jay is never waiting in exactly the same spot. Yet it is never completely absent either. Some evenings it rests on the old maple branch that reaches toward the fence. Other nights it chooses the top of the cedar where the last rays of sunlight catch the edges of its feathers before disappearing. You begin to notice these small differences the way you notice the familiar footsteps of someone who lives in the same house. There is no dramatic encounter, no impossible moment, only repetition. A slight turn of its head when you open the screen door. A brief pause before it slips deeper into the canopy. A feeling that your arrival has somehow become one more quiet detail woven into the rhythm of the evening. Whether that feeling comes from the bird, from your own attention, or from something shared between the two is difficult to say. Perhaps it does not matter. Relationships often begin exactly this way, not through extraordinary events, but through ordinary moments repeated often enough that they begin to carry meaning. And once that meaning takes root, even the smallest gesture feels different. A branch that bends, a pair of wings settling into stillness, a single glance lasting one heartbeat longer than before. Somewhere within those tiny moments, the distance between observer and observed grows just a little smaller, until it becomes surprisingly difficult to tell where your quiet awareness ends and the living landscape around you begins. Then one evening, almost without realizing it, you stop watching only the blue jay. Your attention widens. The entire backyard seems to breathe as a single living place. A mourning dove settles on a fence rail and remains perfectly still. A robin that had been moving across the lawn slips quietly beneath the shadow of a dogwood tree. High above them, the blue jay leaves its familiar perch, gliding silently across the yard before disappearing into darker branches at the edge of the woods. Nothing about the scene feels dramatic. Yet every movement seems connected by an invisible rhythm you cannot quite explain. You notice yourself holding your own breath for a moment, not out of fear but because the evening itself seems to be listening. The remarkable part is that this feeling does not come from seeing something extraordinary. It comes from recognizing how many ordinary things happen together with quiet precision. The fading light, the cooling air, The subtle shift in the wind through the leaves. The birds adjusting one after another, each responding to changes too delicate for most people to consciously detect. It is easy to believe that only the birds understand this language. But perhaps that is not entirely true. Human beings have always sensed patterns before explaining them. You walk into a room and immediately know something feels different. You meet someone for the first time and feel unexpectedly at ease. You choose a different path home without fully knowing why. Only later does your mind search for reasons. Maybe what we call intuition begins exactly this way, not as magic, but as quiet awareness gathering hundreds of tiny signals into a single feeling. And if that is possible, an even more intriguing question begins to emerge. If you have been unconsciously reading the landscape all along, what if the landscape has been quietly reading you just as carefully every evening you step outside? Many people believe that nature speaks only through extraordinary moments, a rare bird, an unexpected encounter, a coincidence that arrives at exactly the right time. Yet the older traditions often suggest something quieter. They speak of attention rather than miracles. They suggest that meaning rarely appears all at once. It gathers slowly, hidden inside ordinary evenings until one day you realize you have been noticing the same gentle pattern for weeks. Something about that feels difficult to ignore. Perhaps that is why standing in a familiar backyard after sunset can sometimes feel strangely comforting, even when nothing unusual seems to happen. The trees remain where they have always been. The fence catches the last silver light. The blue jay settles somewhere beyond easy view. And still, the space feels alive with a presence that cannot quite be measured. Whether that feeling comes from memory, instinct, or something we have not yet learned how to describe, it invites the same quiet response. We become still. We listen more carefully. We stop trying to force an explanation. Researchers can describe remarkable abilities in birds, their memory, their awareness, their sensitivity to subtle changes in the world around them. Those discoveries are extraordinary on their own. But there is another possibility that science does not need to reject in order for it to exist. Perhaps the emotional experience of paying close attention has value in itself. Perhaps what people call intuition is not separate from nature, but one small expression of it. And when those evenings begin repeating often enough, another thought gently emerges. Maybe the most meaningful part of the conversation is not whether the birds are sending us a message. Maybe it is that they quietly remind us we are still capable of hearing one. By now the evening has become familiar in a different way. You no longer step outside expecting to discover something extraordinary. Instead, you find yourself appreciating how extraordinary the ordinary has always been. The air settles gently across the yard. Fireflies begin appearing one by one above the grass. The last color slips from the western sky until every tree becomes a soft silhouette resting against the night. Somewhere high within the branches, unseen but not forgotten, the blue jay has found its place. You do not need to see it anymore to remember it is there. That realization changes something small inside you. You stop searching for answers in every movement. You stop asking whether each call or each silence means something specific. Instead, you begin noticing how the simple act of paying attention has quietly changed the way you experience the world around you. The backyard feels less like scenery and more like a living presence, unfolding at its own patient pace. The leaves continue their gentle conversation with the breeze. The wooden fence cools after holding the warmth of the afternoon sun. A distant cricket begins its steady rhythm, and somehow none of these sounds feel separate anymore. They belong together. So do you. There is a quiet kind of comfort in realizing that not every mystery asks to be solved. Some only ask to be witnessed. Perhaps that is why these evenings linger in memory long after they have passed. Not because something impossible happened, but because for a few peaceful moments, the distance between yourself and the natural world seemed to disappear. And in that stillness, without anyone speaking a single word, you remembered what it feels like simply to belong. The next time evening arrives, nothing outside your window may appear any different. The same trees will catch the fading light. The same breeze may wander through the leaves. Somewhere beyond your sight, a blue jay may settle into the branches exactly as it has done countless evenings before. The remarkable difference may not be in the backyard at all. It may be in the way you choose to stand there. Perhaps you will notice how quickly the world changes when you become quiet enough to meet it. Perhaps you will realize that the moments which once felt empty were never truly empty. They were simply filled with conversations that unfolded without words. Whether those conversations belong entirely to nature, or whether they awaken something ancient inside us, is a question no one can answer with complete certainty. And perhaps it is better that way. Some mysteries lose their beauty the moment they become conclusions. Others continue living because they leave room for wonder. Maybe it was only a bird finding its place for the night. But somehow it never feels like only a bird. Thank you for staying until the very end and sharing these quiet moments with me. If stories like this help you slow down and notice the world a little differently, I hope you will subscribe before you leave, because there are still countless quiet mysteries waiting just beyond the edges of ordinary life. And together we will continue exploring them one gentle story at a time. Until then, when the daylight fades and the backyard grows still once again, take one unhurried look toward the trees. Somewhere out there tonight, a small pair of watchful eyes may be continuing a conversation that began long before you arrived. And perhaps, without even realizing it, you have already become a quiet part of that story.